I waited for his apology. He waited for my love. That line keeps replaying in my head, though the words aren't mine. I wonder if she thinks the same thing when she glances my way, half smile hovering like it knows something I don't. I'm perched on a stool behind the counter at the little bookstore downtown, the one with the peeling sign and the faint smell of old paper and coffee. The clock ticks slower here, or maybe I just notice it more. She walks in like she owns the space, though I know she doesn't. The click of her heels on the wooden floor draws me out of whatever I was half reading, half dreaming. Her hair is streaked with silver now, and she wears it loose, soft around her shoulders, like it doesn't care to be tamed. There's a faint scent, lavender, something dusty from the old novels, that makes me want to lean closer and inhale, though I don't. Her eyes catch mine for a fraction of a second. I almost look away, but something stops me. Something about the way she studies the shelves, the gentle tilt of her head, makes the air between us feel crowded in a good way. I've known her for months. Not close, not really. Just enough that I notice her laughter from across the room. Enough that I remember her voice, low and confident, when she asks for a recommendation or comments on some obscure paperback. She doesn't smile at me every time. She doesn't need to. That's the thing. She doesn't need anyone's approval. And yet, there's this flicker, a hesitation, like maybe she does notice me more than she lets on. Today, she's holding a first edition of something I can't pronounce. She turns it over in her hands, fingering the spine with care. I clear my throat. That's rare, I say, and she looks up at me, eyes narrowing slightly, amused. Rare, she repeats, voice soft but playful. Or overpriced. I laugh, a little too loudly. My hands curl around the edge of the counter. Maybe both. We stand there for a moment, awkward in the kind of way that feels charged, like the space between two magnets before they snap together. She doesn't move, doesn't put the book back, doesn't make a sound. I shouldn't be thinking about the way her fingers hover over the pages, the subtle crease in her brow, the soft sigh when she finally sets it down. But I am. Thanks, she says finally, almost like she's answering a question I didn't ask. She steps toward the door, pauses, and then turns back. Our eyes meet for another heartbeat. Nothing is said, and yet everything is. She brushes past the stack of newly arrived novels as if she's leaving, but there's a small smile tugging at her lips. A silent promise, or a tease, or maybe nothing at all, but enough that I can't stop thinking about it. I watch her leave, the bell above the door chiming softly, and I realize I've been holding my breath. My chest feels tight in a way that makes no sense, and my fingers twitch like they want to reach out and pull her back. Not in a desperate way, but in a way that whispers I've been waiting for this moment longer than I realized. I go back to the counter, stare at the space where she stood. The quiet hum of the bookstore fills the room, yet all I can hear is the echo of her half-smile, the brush of her fingers against the old book, and the unspoken thing between us that is already taking up too much space in my mind. And somehow, I know I'll replay that tiny pause, that small spark, over and over, wondering if she felt it too. Because I think I did. I didn't expect her to come back so soon. The bookstore felt emptier this morning, the sunlight slicing across the floorboards in long, warm streaks. She appeared in the doorway again, the bell tinkling like a hesitant heartbeat. I thought you might need help finding something, I said, trying to sound casual. My voice probably cracked a little. She tilted her head, watching me, and for a second I wondered if she'd caught it. I'm fine, she replied, but the edges of her words softened, almost like an apology she didn't mean to give. She let her bag drop onto the counter with a quiet thud. I noticed how her fingers lingered on the strap for a moment, like she needed something steady. We started shelving the new arrivals together, side by side. I watched the way her hands moved, confident, deliberate, but tired, maybe. The rings on her fingers caught the light, the same ones I'd noticed before, and I realized I'd been memorizing the way she carries herself without noticing. Her laugh bubbled up suddenly at some small joke from a paperback spine. It was brief, almost too quick, but it made the room feel warmer. She paused mid-shelf, one hand hovering over a stack of novels, her brow furrowed. I stopped, too, sensing something in the stillness. Something wrong. I asked. She shook her head, but not fully. Her lips pressed into a thin line. It's nothing, she said softly, but the pause stretched longer than the words themselves. I wanted to ask more, wanted to pry gently, but she stepped back, her gaze slipping past me to the window, to the street outside. I noticed the way her shoulders slumped slightly, the quiet tension in her posture. There was a fragility there, a small crack I hadn't seen before. It made my chest tighten. I wanted to fix it, or maybe just stay close enough that she didn't have to carry it alone. We continued sorting the books, the silence between us humming like an unspoken promise. I brushed past her to reach a stack, and for a moment, our hands nearly touched. She flinched slightly, then froze, letting her hand hover near mine without moving it. My pulse spiked, but I didn't pull away. Neither did she. Then, almost imperceptibly, she let out a soft sigh. A breath that carried more than it should have, a weight I wanted to lift but couldn't. She straightened, cleared her throat, and went back to the shelves, but I caught the subtle way her fingers lingered on the edge, the faint tremor of hesitation. It was one of those moments, quiet, fragile, and charged, that made the world shrink around us. The sunlight on her hair, the faint scent of lavender mingling with old paper, the almost imperceptible tension in her posture. It all pressed in, sharp and warm at the same time. When she finally looked at me, her eyes held something fleeting. A question? A warning? A spark I wasn't meant to see? I didn't answer. I just let the moment linger, hoping she might, even briefly, notice how much I'd already seen. The storm had been drumming against the hotel window for hours, a low, persistent rhythm that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. I was sitting across from her at the small table in the corner, the leftover wine between us untouched, the flicker of candlelight catching the lines at the corners of her eyes. We'd been talking about nothing in particular, yet everything felt weighted. Her laugh had come out quieter than usual, and when she tilted her head to sip her wine, I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers. I wanted to reach out, to steady them, but I didn't. The words were there, somewhere, hovering at the edges of my throat. Something like I've been thinking about you, but I couldn't speak them, not yet. I never realized this book could feel so alive, she said, holding a tattered copy of something we'd both read. She traced a finger over the cover as if it carried a secret she hadn't shared with anyone. You mean like a secret? I asked, trying to sound casual. My chest tightened when her eyes met mine. Maybe, she whispered, almost too softly. Her gaze flicked away, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink around us. I leaned forward, just a fraction, tempted to close the distance. Her hair brushed my shoulder when she shifted, a breath away from touching me. The storm outside matched the erratic rhythm in my chest, and every instinct screamed to lean closer, to let something happen. But I stayed put, the restraint almost painful. Then her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the fragile spell. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and stiffened. I saw her fingers tighten around it, and something in her expression flickered, frustration, hesitation, maybe regret. Whoever it was, it pulled her back from the edge of whatever moment had been forming between us. I swallowed hard and didn't speak, didn't move. The silence stretched, filled only by the storm and her shallow breaths. I wanted to ask who it was, wanted to make her forget everything else for just a second, but I couldn't. That wasn't my place. She set the phone down with a soft exhale, running a hand through her hair as if to shake off the tension. I could see the faint worry lines around her eyes, the way her jaw tightened, the subtle shift in her posture. She was trying to reclaim herself, to put up the walls I knew she'd never fully admit existed. The candlelight flickered again, casting a shadow that almost seemed to connect us across the table. I wanted to reach for her hand, just a light brush, but I stayed frozen, knowing the moment would vanish the second I acted. My fingers itched, my heart raced, every instinct fighting the restraint I'd imposed on myself for months. Her gaze found mine again, lingering longer than it should. Something unspoken hung between us, tension, longing, a spark that neither of us would admit out loud. I leaned in slightly, just enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, just enough that I knew if she leaned too, if we didn't stop ourselves, We would cross a line we couldn't come back from. The room smelled faintly of rain and old paper. She was sitting across from me, knees tucked under her, staring out the window, as if the storm outside could explain what neither of us could put into words. I wanted to break the silence, wanted to fill it with something, anything, but the weight of it pressed down harder the longer I stayed still. Finally, she spoke. Just a whisper, almost a question, almost an accusation. "What are we doing?" I froze, because the words were exactly what I'd been afraid to ask myself. My throat tightened, my hands curled into fists in my lap. I don't know, I admitted. Not a lie, not a half-truth. Just raw, unspeakable uncertainty. She didn't look at me, didn't turn her gaze. The quiet stretched, thick and suffocating, until I realized the air between us had changed. It wasn't playful anymore. It wasn't tentative curiosity. It was something heavier, more permanent, like the weight of a secret we'd been carrying for months without naming. I watched the way her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the table. The rhythm was small, almost imperceptible, but I felt every beat. Her shoulders slumped slightly, a crack in the armor I'd only glimpsed before. And in that moment, I wanted to say so much, tell her that I noticed, that I cared, that I'd been holding myself back for reasons I couldn't fully explain, but the words got caught somewhere between my chest and my lips. She finally turned to me, slow, deliberate, and the storm outside seemed to echo her hesitation. "This, whatever this is, it doesn't feel right. And it doesn't feel wrong," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, just a little, and I caught the flicker of vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I know," I said softly, because that was the truth. I knew exactly what she meant. And it terrified me how much I agreed, how much I wanted it to be something more even though we both knew it shouldn't be. The room was quiet again, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears, makes your heartbeat feel loud, makes every small movement, her hand brushing her hair back, the tap of her foot against the floor, feel amplified. I wanted to bridge the space between us, to say her name, to touch her hand, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I just watched her, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked to mine then away. The silence became unbearable, but neither of us moved to break it. Then she whispered, almost too softly to hear over the storm, "I think I've been waiting for something I don't even understand." And I realized I'd been waiting for the same thing. Not an apology, not a confession, something unnameable, something we couldn't claim without destroying ourselves in the process. We sat there, two halves of a question neither of us could answer, and I felt more exposed than I ever had. The words weren't romantic. They weren't declarations of love. They were the rawest honesty I'd ever heard, and it left me hollow in the best and worst way at once. I wanted to speak, to say something that could fix the tension, make it safe, make it normal. But there was no normal to return to, only the truth. "I don't think I can do this," she murmured, and it felt like the world shifted just a little, irrevocably, between us. I didn't expect her to bring it up. We were stacking returned books in silence, the afternoon sun streaming in through the dusty blinds, when she stopped, mid-motion, and let her hands linger on a worn spine. I haven't told anyone this," she said, voice low, almost swallowed by the quiet. She glanced at me, and there was a flicker in her eyes, vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "Years ago, I lost someone, and I don't mean just the usual heartbreak. I mean someone I thought I'd spend my life with. And then they were gone." The words landed softly but heavy, like stones in my chest. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach across the counter, touch her hand, but the moment wasn't about comfort. It was about listening, really listening, to the fracture in her voice. "I try not to think about it," she continued, eyes now fixed on the floor. "But sometimes it sneaks up, even now, years later." Her fingers traced an invisible pattern along the edge of the table. "I'm careful mostly, but I guess I never really healed." I swallowed hard. I know someone like that," I said quietly. "Someone I cared about so much, and then couldn't fix. Maybe they didn't even know how much they meant." My own voice surprised me with the tremor, the softness. I thought I was just listening, but suddenly I was sharing, too. She looked up at me then, eyes wide, and for a fraction of a second, it felt like she could see straight into the parts of me I kept hidden. Her lips parted slightly, a soft inhale, as if she wanted to say something and didn't know how. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. I resisted the urge to groan. It was always something, always pulling her attention away. She glanced at it, hesitated, then set it back down. And I realized she had a voicemail waiting, something from someone from that past she'd just confessed. Her hand hovered over the screen, trembling, and I saw a flicker of fear, of old wounds reopening. I wanted to speak, to ask, to pull her back from whatever memory that message carried. But I didn't. I let her decide, letting the silence stretch between us, heavy and fragile. Finally, she exhaled, leaning back against the counter. Her gaze found mine again, steady, raw. "It's stupid," she murmured. "I thought I was over it. I thought I was strong enough. But I'm not. Not really." I didn't answer, didn't need to. The air between us had shifted, subtly seismic in a way neither of us could ignore. Her vulnerability had cracked something open inside me, a longing, a protective instinct, and something else I couldn't name yet. She let out a soft sigh, a mixture of relief and shame, and I noticed the faint quiver of her jaw. Her eyes glistened, not with tears exactly, but with something unspoken, a tremor of fear, of memory, and maybe a spark of something fragile that hadn't been there before. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. I wanted to say her pain didn't scare me, didn't push me away. But all I could do was look at her, hold the space, and silently feel the shift between us. Something had changed. Something was already moving. And when she finally tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, I felt it. A quiet, seismic pulse, like the world had tilted just slightly, and neither of us could ignore it. The rain had stopped by the time we found ourselves on the empty bench outside the cafe. Wet leaves clung to the pavement, and the air smelled sharp and clean, like it had been washed of everything else. We didn't speak at first. Words felt unnecessary, even dangerous. Somehow, the quiet between us carried everything we hadn't said for months. She shifted slightly, letting her shoulder brush mine. It wasn't intentional, I don't think, but it was enough. Enough to make me notice the warmth of her sleeve, the subtle weight of her presence, the way she seemed to take up space without trying. I wanted to pull back and maintain the careful distance I'd kept all this time, but the pull toward her was stronger than restraint. She started, then stopped, her gaze falling to the damp leaves at our feet. I didn't interrupt. I knew what she meant to say, and I knew it didn't need to be said aloud. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. Instead, she leaned just slightly closer, her hand brushing mine by accident, and I felt a jolt. Small, electric, undeniable. I let my fingers linger near hers, not pressing, just existing in that shared space. She didn't pull away. And in that simple, quiet gesture, the truth we'd both been holding finally settled between us. No declarations. No grand promises. Just the acknowledgement that the line we'd been circling for months had been crossed. Quietly, cautiously, honestly. The storm inside us had finally given way to something steady, human, earned. We stayed like that for a long time, watching the city blink alive with streetlights, the occasional car splashing through puddles. I noticed the faint curve of her lips when she looked at a passing child, the way her hair caught the last remnants of sunlight, and the softness in her eyes that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of hesitation. "I'm glad," she whispered finally. Just that word. And it was enough. More than enough. I felt the same, but I didn't say it aloud. We didn't need the words. Our hands touched again, this time just a deliberate brush, deliberate enough that it said everything we couldn't. She rested her head against my shoulder, and I felt the steady rise and fall of her breath. The moment wasn't romantic in the fairy tale sense. It was real, fragile, earned through months of silence, hesitation, near misses, and truths too heavy to carry alone. I shifted slightly, letting my forehead rest lightly against the side of hers, and the weight of it all pressed down in the gentlest way. No sparks, no fireworks, just gravity, just presence, just us. We didn't need to speak. There was nothing to say. The city moved around us, oblivious, but the world we'd created between us, careful, human, slow-burning, felt complete. Finally, she let out a soft sigh, the kind that wasn't relief, exactly, but a recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that this, whatever this was ours, and it was enough. And I knew, finally, that I wouldn't let go. Looking back, it's strange how small moments carry the weight of everything. The quiet pauses, the almost touching hands, the laughter caught in half-breaths, they weren't just fleeting. They were the pieces that built something neither of us expected, something fragile and real. Months later, the memory of that first shared silence still lingers. The bookstore, the stormy nights, the hesitant glances, they're not just memories. They're lessons. She learned to trust again, slowly, carefully, without rushing. I learned to wait without expectation, to see her fully, and to carry my own heart without fear of breaking it. Love didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, in the way a hand brushes another in passing, in the shared look that says more than words ever could. It didn't erase past mistakes or old heartbreaks. It simply acknowledged them and let us exist together despite them. The pull, the hesitation, the longing, they didn't vanish. They evolved. They became patience, understanding, and the kind of intimacy that isn't flashy but feels heavier than anything else. And in that, there's a beauty I didn't know I could recognize until I saw it reflected in her eyes. I can't say we were perfect. We never pretended to be. But the moments we claimed, the quiet decisions to stay present, to respect the space between us while still leaning in, that was enough. That was everything. Sometimes, when the city is quiet and a memory drifts in, I still catch the echo of her half-smile, the brush of her fingers against a book, and I realize how much the slow burn shaped me, changed the way I see connection, patience, and love itself. This story wasn't about declarations. It was about understanding, noticing, waiting, and finally being seen. And in that, we found something lasting, something earned, something human. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?